Hello and welcome to Success is Never Accidental. I'm Lynn Payton and I'm passionate about helping individuals and organizations to get better outcomes and to feel more fulfilled. And on this podcast, I get to interview some highly successful people from all over the globe so that we can learn from their experiences and appreciate that there is a formula for success. My guest today describes himself as a retail obsessive. Working with Ted Baker for more than 30 years, Chris Browne was the company's global retail director and he expanded the Ted Baker brand internationally. During that time, Chris was responsible for many aspects of Ted's unique style of retail, with its innovative and sometimes controversial windows, direct marketing, and gifts with purchases. This included handing out condoms with every purchase in support of AIDS charities and an early decision never to advertise. Since leaving Ted Baker in 2017, Chris has been busy with his non-executive director roles in several companies, including Angel Space and At Sons, as well as providing global retail insight for leading consulting firms and private equity houses. His angel investments are diverse and include a paddle tennis club in Australia and the recently launched Jelly Drops hydrating sweets for dementia sufferers. Chris also enjoys sharing his vision with fellow retailers through keynote speeches and his advisory work, and I'm delighted to welcome him to Success is Never Accidental. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today from Sussex. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, looking forward to this.
Chris, how did you even get into retail in the first place?
By upsetting my family. So I was working in a bank, a nice solid job, working my way up through the bank. I think I reached level 3 in record time and I was very proud of myself. And then one day realized this just isn't for me. People quite often are quite angry where their money's concerned. And I walked out and my father was furious. My mother was amazed, and all around me, people were like, "You're crazy. You'll be a bank manager by the time you're 35." And anyway, I couldn't get a job for nearly 6 months, but I got a job in a shoe store. And nobody believes these stories, Lynn. They think these are apocryphal. This is why I made it. But this actually happened to me in my first week. At the end of my first week, on the Friday of my first week, the area manager came to the store. I was a full-time sales assistant, and he commented to the manager, "That new assistant manager is good." And the manager said, "We haven't got one yet." And he said, "No, that chap, Chris, assistant manager." He said, "No, he's full-time sales." So I got promoted that day. The area manager came back in and said, "I want to give you the job." So I got the job as assistant manager in a shop in my first week in the job. And this is true. I won't bore you with the whole backstory, but I'm very, very competitive. And I've got a sob story about my badminton career if you want to hear it. But anyway, I couldn't continue my badminton career and I decided to become the world's best retailer. So literally there and then in that first week, I enjoyed what I was doing and I set out being the world's best retailer. I was promoted to manager within a year, and I set about changing the way the things were done in the store, which we can explore in more detail. So that's how I became a retailer.
Unbelievable and yet believable, because what you said there is about when you put your mind to something, everything is possible. Tell us a little bit about what kind of mindset you needed to be successful in the very competitive industry of retail.
Um, the first thing is, and this is an insult to everyone else that works in retail, but it's a job in which everyone's got a bad experience. I'm sure if I asked you, you could come up with 20 bad shopping experiences and bad service and bad experience. So I would say that it's an industry that, despite being, they say that Great Britain are a nation of, shopkeepers. Actually, it's not really true. Maybe it's a nation of grumpy shopkeepers. So the standards weren't high. And I genuinely saw an opportunity right from the earliest days. And I had experience. I actually worked in a pet shop during my teens, and I worked in a newspaper store when I was 12, 13 years old. The pet store was incredible. It was run by a grumpy old man who could not stand customers. And he wouldn't give people refunds. He would shout and swear at people. And so I had that sort of as my, if you like, the role model there. And then the area manager, who, despite the fact he gave me a promotion, he tried to run the business like it was the military because he'd been in the Navy. And so he'd come in and everything was like regimented and had to be done to the book. So I started breaking up those rules. So it was a combination of seeing an opportunity that retail wasn't very well run. And I still would argue it now. And any retailer watching it would start to argue with me that they ran it well. It's not. Some of the best businesses in Britain are actually not that well run at shop floor level. And so I determined, and I'm a shop floor retailer, I spent my time with the teams in the shops, with the managers in the stores as I went through the ranks, and making certain that what we said around the boardroom was actually what we delivered in the shop. So yeah, my main technique was doing every little thing better than anyone else.
And that can be applied across industries and sectors, can't it, Chris, if we all just committed to doing everything that little bit better?
Absolutely, and it shocks me. So one of my little tests, and I genuinely didn't do this to catch people out. I did it to then produce a lesson. Was I just tear a piece of paper up and throw it on the floor in the passageway behind the store, leading out to the stockroom, and I just see who picked it up. Because again, you want to create a culture where you don't not do things because it's not your job. You do whatever needs to be done when you see that it needs to be done. So it became a thing. I mean, I didn't do it all the time. I did it in the early years just to see what reaction I would get. And I will just tell you one quick apocryphal story. I moved on from the shoe store I worked in. Apocryphal is the wrong word. Sorry, it's a true story. Um, um, I worked in the King's Road in London, and I nearly got sacked. I think 2 months into my job there, I was appalled at the state of the store. The basement where we stored the shoes was damp, dirty, paint peeling off the walls, smelly old carpet, and a terrible toilet. So I came in over the weekend. Sundays, in those days, the stores were shut. I came in on a Sunday with two friends, and we completely repaired all the shelving with new wood. We repainted the whole of the basement area and sealed some of the damp areas. We tore up the carpet and put down some new carpet, and we cleaned out the toilet. And this might sound small, but we put a wooden seat on the toilet that just aesthetically made the whole toilet look more appealing. And it was a shared toilet, men and women using it. On the Monday, they called a board meeting, and the chairman of the business had flown in from Jersey, called me upstairs, and basically said I was being sacked for spending company money without authority. And the punchline is, Lynn, I spent my own money. I didn't spend a penny of company money. I basically paid my two friends to come in and help me. One was a plasterer and one was a decorator. They came in to help me. I paid them myself, and I spent £300, which is a lot of money in about 1983. I spent £300 because I couldn't work there. And when he found that out, you know what happened? He gave me a pay rise. So I went from being sacked within 20 minutes from sacked to getting a pay rise. So going back to saying doing the little things, it's doing everything to a higher standard all the time and having that mindset all the time. I'd get to work earlier, I'd leave last. And that just was hard to beat me, because I would just do, and now I'm talking about all the way through. And as a director, every board meeting, I arrived an hour early. So it's having that mindset changes everything. And that applies to sport, it applies to life, it applies to conduct as a person.
Absolutely. And it was so funny. I did an event in Glasgow one time, and one of my older ones, I think they were all in their 20s at that stage, he had his elbows on the table, and I said, Timothy. And the other three looked at him and said, what have we got in this house? And all three of them went, standards. And then they bought me this sign later on, Chris, for the kitchen, and it said, when all else fails, lower your standards. So,
I've always sorry to butt in. I've always liked the Groucho Marx line where he says, these are my morals, and if these are my principles. If you don't like them, I've got others.
Yeah, that's a good one too. So then tell us about Ted Baker, because you got in pretty much on the ground floor of Ted Baker, and then you brought it through to the amazing global success. How did that all happen?
So it was an accidental meeting. I was working for the Tube, the shoe company that I was working for in London that I just mentioned, that I redecorated the stockrooms. And actually, a similar story in a way that I was working at 3 o'clock in the morning in October of 1987. And the actual founder of Ted Baker was across the road, just come back from a meeting with his potential partners in this new idea, this new business. And effectively, they said the first thing is we need a retailer. And he saw me there. I mean, I look young for my age, Lynn. I'm very lucky. I'm 63, but I look younger. When I was 25, which was when I met Ray, I promise you, I looked about 13. I looked so young. And he came across the street and we had this conversation. And he said, look, I wanted to do niche retailing for a particular product. What would you do? And without knowing what Ted Baker was going to become, I said, well, shirts. You need to do shirts well. And Ted Baker, for the first 7 or 8 years of its life, was a shirt specialist. That's all we did: men's shirts and then some women's shirts. So that's how I met effectively the founder of TED. I'm not allowed to say I'm the co-founder, but in many ways I feel like I was. But I'm not allowed to say that. So I ran the retailing for 30 years. You know, I started it. I opened the first stores, built us up to 500 locations around the world. And we were in every major territory. So we were across the US and Canada and Europe and Japan and China and Australia and so on. I did all of that, spearheaded all of that. But the most important thing to me at the time was we wanted to be a retailer like no other. So this what sounded like an idle boast a few minutes ago. I wanted to be the best at retail in the world. That is what I drove the team. That was the grand vision for us, was be the best at this. And if you don't want to stay in retail, be the best whilst you're in it, because that will transfer over into whatever you go on to do. Because again, the issue you've got, which is you mentioned your son and some of the troubles he has with the teams and trying to get people to stay. I would impress upon people that it doesn't matter if this is not going to be your future career, because for so many people they're passing through in stores, you know, it's a good part-time job, it's a job to have while you're at university or you're doing something else. But so often people would enjoy what we did and how we trained and developed them, that they would end up staying in the teams. But I was comfortable either way. But I'd say you're not gonna surf along and take it easy while you're here. If you want to do that, go and work for another retailer, because there's plenty out there that will let you take it easy. So I had that sort of, if you like, that driven sense of purpose. I drove through the teams, and we had 3,500 employees around the world on the retail side.
Tell us a little bit about how you adapted, because the culture in Japan is very different to the culture in the United States, for example. How did you integrate your philosophy and your way of doing business into those very different cultures?
I think that's a brilliant question, Lynn, because it's something that we spent a lot of time on, and I don't think anyone really understood the amount of credit we needed for doing it, because it's challenging. You know, it's very challenging. You know, one thing I learned, and this is going to sound, but it's a cultural thing. It's not a nationalist or a racialist comment, but the attitude is depending on each country. So in America, I found that you had to be incredibly specific with instructions. So if I said, would you go and clean the window to somebody? In England, that would mean they go and clean the window. In America, that would be okay. And then they might come back to you an hour later and say, when do you want me to clean the window? Because you didn't say now. And then you say now, oh, okay, I'll go and clean the window now. You then find them in the window, not knowing what to do with the window. And you say, what are you doing? And they'd say, well, you said clean the window now, but what with? And I'm being unkind here. It sounds like I'm being unkind, but I had that repeated experience in America, particularly the US, over and over and over again. And it's why if you're in an American restaurant and you live in America part-time, Americans are very specific how they want their food. It's kind of an example of that. Now, that's not to say they were stupid or they were unintelligent or untrainable, but you had to be specific. Similarly, in Japan, if people were not self-starting, I found in Japan. So in Japan, they needed not just the instructions, but they needed a plan for what was going to happen after they'd finished that job and the next job and the next job. Otherwise, they'd just stop. Now, again, I learned a lot from trying to work with the different cultures. If I take France, again, I pick on France a lot in my business career. The French want to debate with you what you ask them to do. So you have got all these cultural differences, but the point is, I'm making it sound like I'm mocking them. I'm not. The point is to learn and understand and be flexible with each of those cultural differences. In Japan, they would never disagree with the boss. That's a cultural thing that's been impressed upon them. Whereas in Britain, we actively encourage that debate. So again, and I found that fascinating. I saw that as a great challenge and an exciting thing to have to understand.
And I'm reminded by the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, where he
Yes.
said that was the cause of several air disasters, that the engineer would not argue with the pilot because culturally, in I think it was Korea, and that is,
Korean Air, yes, I've read the book, and
yeah,
the co-pilot could only say, "Would you like to consider a second alternative course?" because there's a mountain ahead that the captain doesn't seem to have spotted. And the captain said, no, I'm happy with this course. And then they would say it in another way. There are some alternatives to the route we're going on that you might wish to consider. And so it would go on until eventually that plane hit the mountain. That's, I think, how he described it in the book.
Yeah,
And they
yeah,
had to
yeah.
be retrained. I think they were actually retrained by Air France pilots. I can't remember, but
It is fascinating, though, how people neglect getting a proper understanding of how to do business with the people they're doing business with. And you describe that culturally, Chris, but it can also be personality wise as well. You know,
absolutely.
it's not one size fits all when you appoint a manager to a store, for example. We have to understand, how does that person think? How do they process information? So a lot of things to take into account. What would you have said were, if there were two or three fundamental um, motivating factors that you relied on? What would those have been?
Um, Well, before I answer that, I just want to say that we did so much work on teams and team characters and how you and your personality and your traits fit into a team. We used a process called Belbin, which you may have heard of.
Mhm.
Professor Belbin's techniques, absolutely fascinating. When we use those, people often would say the managers and head office teams that would come to the training events we ran externally, the first time they'd ever really understood the different personality traits of themselves and other people in the team and analyze those, you'd then find someone that perhaps liked energy and speed and getting things done would butt up against somebody who wanted to understand things in more detail. But they have character types. They have within Belbin, they have character types. And we did so much work that then improved the way that people work together. But to answer the second part of your question, the three traits. The first and overwhelming trait that I look for, and we perhaps go when we interview, we tend to go for the likeness, and I'm aware of that. You like people that are like you,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah,
the
yeah.
trait that I would say doesn't need to be you're like me, but just enthusiasm.
Mhm.
I want energy and enthusiasm and a positive feeling, and that could be quiet. It doesn't have to be loud. And I would go for that. So if I'm feeling positive energy from somebody, that's my overriding trait, and I would look for that throughout the teams. Um, Desire is another one. So actually, a desire to do a good job. You want people that come in and without me trying to make them do a good. I don't. I see that as a given that you're coming in to do a good job, and that's not actually true for everybody. Some people are just coming in to get the day done. Some people are coming in just to time serve, get paid at the end of it, and walk away. So enthusiasm, desire, and then the last thing would be intelligence. And there's all sorts of different types of intelligence. And again, I'd value running stockrooms correctly, for example, often a forgotten part of running a business. But
Mm.
if you run the stockroom correctly, it's the engine room of the business. And so, my tours around the world to see all the stores, always I'd have comment from managers saying, wow, you spent a serious amount of time with the stockroom team. They really value that. They'll say, I don't know, when another director came or somebody else in their previous jobs, they would never even walk in the stockroom. So you have to constantly, so what did I say there? Enthusiasm, desire, and intelligence would be the three things.
Mhm. And also that piece about acknowledging that all of the points, all of the cogs in the wheel are important. And as you say, not all directors would go and see the more routine tasks. And
No,
yet, if the stockroom functions properly, everything else can flow from
that's
that.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we met on a webinar recently, and I was impressed by one of the things that you said, which is kind of resonant with what your factors there were. But you said nowadays you choose happy.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's
Tell us a
forever.
little
That's
bit more.
forever. That's forever, Lynn. I'm fortunate to have a happy disposition. My mother used to say I came out of the womb laughing. So, and actually, I've written a short story which is going towards a book about being a sentient child. Being born and having a brain, that could actually understand what was occurring to me, and smiling. They often say babies don't smile to a certain age, but smiling from the delivery room forwards. But my reason's really simple. I say to people, they say, oh, you're always so happy and you're always so cheerful and you always find amusement. I choose happy because I don't like the alternative.
Yeah.
And that's the bigger reason. I don't want to spend a minute of my time in sadness. I mean, this might sound like a bit of an offshoot, but I'll say it anyway. My dearly beloved cat died about a month ago. I had two cats, but one was my boy. One was my favorite. I can't lie, he was my favorite. 19 and a bit years old, Bengal cat. Had him since he was a kid. And my only pet. There's a long sob story about why he's my only pet. I'm the only pet in my life. And so to have him die and die the way that he did, he broke his leg so badly he couldn't be operated on, and that was the end. But the sadness that I felt, I flipped it in the same day. I still get a little tearful when I think about him and how much I loved. He'd run to see me. He's like a dog. He'd run to see me. But um, I feel this happiness of 19 years of having that special animal in my life and feeling the emotions I felt towards that animal. My wife would, if she was here, say, "Oh yeah, you loved him more than you love me." Well, she's got a horse that she probably loves more than she loves me. So I understand the emotion. I used to say I didn't understand it, but I do now. I absolutely understand the grief people go through with the pet. But I would argue to anybody, it's not, it shouldn't be grief. It should be pleasure and happiness in the life they led. I mean, 19 is actually close to the world record for a Bengal cat. I found out subsequently. The oldest lived Bengal cat was 21, so he was doing pretty well. So yeah, so I choose happy. It's not even a conscious decision. I don't have to think about it. It's just what I choose all the time. And I try to spread happiness. Even in situations where someone's not kind to me, I've got better and better and better at giving happiness back and reflecting happiness to people.
And that's something I think that we get better at as we get older because it doesn't matter so much anymore. And if we can reframe something positively, even in a difficult situation, you know what, it makes us feel better, even if it doesn't make the other person feel better. So I love that. And I think it's so important that we emphasize to our listeners that that choice is open to everyone every single day in every single moment. Just take that moment and make that conscious choice.
Absolutely.
Look for the positives. So, what advice would you give to someone? I mean, you've given us great advice there about choosing people with enthusiasm, looking for the best, setting high standards, wanting people to be their best in that moment. But life's tough in a whole lot of occupations these days. What advice would you give someone who's stepping into a leadership role in a business about how to model great leadership behavior?
I've got one sort of big factor that I observe, and I observed it in my own teams at times, and it frustrated me that I hadn't solved this puzzle. So I think I had success with it, but I also think I didn't always succeed. And it's a really simple one. People don't model great behavior quite often when they go up the ranks. They start to forget. They seem to forget where they came from, humility, and the word hubris, which I always think is a strange word that we don't understand sometimes, but that kind of aggrandizing, I can't say the word, that self-aggrandizement, that sort of like, look at me, I'm so that pomposity that people seem to build as they go up the ranks. Now, I'd like to think I'm the antithesis of that. I was approachable, easygoing, tough. Don't get me wrong, Lynn. I'm making this all sound like I'm almost like happy, clappy, fun all the time. I was tough on standards. My mum was tough,
Mhm.
tough but fair, and so I had that. But I never got above myself. I say to people now, I was born in 1962 as a retail director. No, I wasn't. I'd spent a long journey getting there. I had some, tough times on the way through. And then being a retail director for nearly 30 years of my life and beyond, um, always tried to remember these younger guys and girls in the teams in the stores. They may look at me as a role model. Well, I've got to model that. I've got to model the best of standards. I've got to say what I say, do what I do, be on time. Come and do it with a smile. When I'm not happy with something, that I deliver that that criticism or that critique or change that I'm requiring in a way that's completely and utterly understandable and fair and is a learning moment. I never got angry. This is a crazy thing. I used to get told by the founder, show them you're angry. I'm like, I can't do that because I'm not angry. I'm not. Why would I be angry? We're selling shirts, Lynn. We're not curing cancer or doing anything particularly important, you know. And they're here, and they're underlying all of that is probably the biggest point I'd want to say to your listeners and to anyone I ever meet is, I am not money driven at all, not even slightly. Even when you're in a business, when you're commercially trying to sell and beat last year's numbers and trade, my whole attitude was do the job well, and then the trade there it will come. I didn't make the shirts. I might have an input into what they look like and what needs to change or what we might want to sell more. I had an impact definitely, but my job was to make the teams great and make sure the stores look great and make sure what we said we did, and make certain that it's showtime on the shop floor. You're out on stage, So I'm not sure if I've made that very clear, but effectively, what I'm saying is absolutely, absolutely live to the standards that you want to be judged by. And if you start to become self-important and grand, you're going to fail. I mean, and my old brand, it's arguable that's what happened to them. I left and it believed its own hype. And certain people there believe their own hype. I don't want to be too critical of it because there's other factors too. And that's happened to, Topshop and Sir Philip Green and famous leaders in British retail history over and over again, and other industries too, I'm sure. So stay humble, stay true, stay real, stay. I mean, I'm lucky. I'm a happy person. So I don't find it hard to do those things, but I can then impact a whole group of people to feel that same way. I mean, I meet people from my old TED years all the time, and I love this. I mean, they never seem to have a bad word to say about me or what I did. I met somebody actually at the nosh up that we were describing, the one golden nugget nosh up. I met somebody there who came up and he went, "It's Chris, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah." And he went, "I've got a message for you from Sydney, a lady, was one of my store managers and a fantastic girl, Sydney Doling." He went, "I'm Sydney Doling's sister-in-law." And he said, "You've got to look out for Chris and send him my love. He's the best." My heart sang. I was like, wow, that's someone I work with. I haven't seen her for 10 years. And she sent me a message through her brother-in-law. So
But isn't that wonderful? Don't we all just want to be remembered for the good things and the light that we brought into somebody's world? So
absolutely.
just looking back, because you've had a fantastic career and you're still making a huge impact in the retail industry, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But if there was one thing that you would have done differently, what would that have been?
uh, um, this is going to sound so arrogant, but nothing. Honestly, I don't think there's. I'd love to say something. I was asked this by somebody previously, and then actually no. I mean, I know that I can look at myself in the mirror and say every single day that I was at work. I used to use a phrase, "How hard do you work when no one's looking?" And I can answer that question truthfully and say harder than you. I worked very, very hard every day of my life. I've just finished a year's consultancy out in Saudi Arabia, doing 10 days trips there per month. I was in the office at 7:30 every day on my own. Nobody else was there. 7:30, and people would arrive at 9, 9:30, 10 o'clock. Anyway, that was one story. And then at the end of that day, the day finished at 5 o'clock. I generally left the office at quarter to 6, 6:30, that kind of time. Anywhere, just I'm doing my job. I'm doing a little bit extra to set the following day up. And I did that every single day for the whole time that I was there. And other consultants say, "What are you doing? Why are you in so early?" I say, "Because my standards are my standards. And if they're not yours, you crack on. You do what you want." So
It's
no, I
very,
can't. There
it's
should be
very
something, shouldn't there,
interesting.
Lynn? There should be something. Maybe there's something I've missed.
Probably not, because it's very interesting because I've asked that question of a number of very successful people and they had very similar answers. They said that's not to say they didn't do a lot of things wrong, but instead of beating themselves up about it, they learned from it and moved on and integrated it. So, um,
I don't. Well, I have got one, Lynn. Sorry, I tell you what. There's one thing, but the worst thing is something I probably should change, but I won't change it because it's part of who I am. I'm too trusting. My wife says that to me all the time. And in retail, that's a tough thing to be, but because unfortunately so much of theft is internal in retail. So I
yeah.
was tough when I found out and I could clear people out, but I definitely tried to give people chances. And maybe I should have learned from that. But it's hard if you're a trusting person, it's very hard to switch that mindset to being a suspicious and challenging person. So maybe that, but I would say the benefit of being that way, we had a very low turnover of people. People stayed in the business. They enjoyed working with me. They enjoyed working with the teams we created. So that one thing, but I'm still not sure if I'd change it.
Okay. And the thing is, low turnover is what everybody is trying to achieve nowadays. Building and sustaining teams is
Yeah,
really one of the most challenging things for most managers and leaders
yeah.
these days. So well done on the low turnover. But I'm fascinated by one of the other things that you're involved in at the moment, the jelly drops hydrating sweets,
Oh
because
yes.
I have friends with dementia. I have people whose parents have dementia, and I've also got a friend who's into functional medicine, and he's really working on pushing back the impact of dementia. So tell us a little bit about jelly drops.
Absolutely. One of my well, it's probably my favorite thing that I've done in the last 6 or 7 years. So I got involved about 6 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, at the beginning of Jelly Drops journey. I didn't realize, but I actually gave them the investment that got the IP secured and some of the background paperwork secured for the business, which set it off. So Lewis, the founder, I contacted him to say, look, I love this idea. I read about it in the Metro newspaper in London. And it's a fabulous product. It's basically it's incredibly altruistic. Lewis's intention was to help his grandmother who had dementia,
Yeah.
and solve the problem of her not being hydrated and not drinking very much. Which for anyone with a dementia or Alzheimer's suffering relative or friend, everyone, that is one of the key aspects of it. Is they forget to make the connection between hydration and drinking a drink. It's quite an incredible short circuit of the brain. But this is a trick, effectively. It looks like a little jelly sweet. You put it next to someone who suffers from dementia. And unfortunately, like naughty school children, because again, there's a little bit of reversion goes on when we get old to childhood. They feel like they're being naughty taking a sweet and eating it. And they're designed, you or I may not like the taste of them. I happen to like them, but you may not like it because they're not aimed at us. They're aimed at people with dementia. They're very strongly fruit flavored. And 96% of what you ingest returns to water in the body. And if you eat 6 or 7 of them, it's like eating a nice decent sized cup of water. And we don't make medical claims, but it's a simple fact that if you are well hydrated, probably you're medically going to feel better. And people do. And we have such a lovely, testimonials from customers saying, Nana spoke about, her husband for the first time in 5 years, or Nana remembered some facts from her school days that she hasn't spoken about. Nana went outside for a walk, and Granddad went outside for a walk. So they're doing fabulously well. The business is growing fast. We're actually trading so well in America. It's actually sucking in a lot of the business and the energy. But it's just jellydrops.com for anyone that's listening. Please go on and have a look. Lewis is about making the business big. He's similar to my view. He's not really bothered about the money side of it. The money's coming anyway. We're trading so well. They've got a fabulous team behind it. They've got some senior British food manufacturing companies have invested and can see the benefit and the value of this business. We are hoping to get into the NHS at some point, but that's been slow. But somewhere down the line, I think we will. And the reason, just quickly, Lynn, is that I grew up in a care home. Not because I needed the care myself. My parents owned a care home for 40 years. So my father actually ran it for 20 plus years after my mother passed away. And so I saw the impact, and I saw old people. So when I met Lewis, he was a bit suspicious of my motives. I said, I genuinely have a passion for older people being treated well, not least because one day, hopefully, I'm going to be one of them. So it's a fabulous thing to be involved in. And I just do very light touch now. I advise Lewis and Claudia, who are the co-founders, speak with them from time to time, attend some of the board meetings if I'm invited. I'm not officially a board member. I just invested. And it's set to get bigger and better. And I encourage everyone to give it a look.
Absolutely fabulous. And how can people get in touch with you, Chris? What are your social media handles?
Well, obviously on LinkedIn, just Chris Browne on there. I think it's on the end. You're going to put it on the end somewhere. I don't know how to tell you on LinkedIn.
I'll do it.
You do it for me. Sorry, I don't know. And yeah, I'm happy for people to email me or get in touch. On anything. I mean, I'm actually working on a medical product with one of the One Golden Nugget alumni at the moment. This is an amazing new project I'm working on. This is it's not dialysis, but it's a way of cleansing the blood of toxins, and it prevents overdose death, and liver coma will be the second part of it. It's using graphene. It's very high tech. It's been created by 2 working doctors in the US who work in these 2 fields. And I'm not going to make the claims in terms of the percentages, but it makes a huge percentage drop in the number of people that don't survive drug or alcohol overdose. And it will have a huge impact on the numbers that die from liver coma, which is currently, I believe the stats are 50% of the people that go into liver coma don't come out of it again, so they die. 50% do come out of it, but with the damage obviously inflicted and are in poor health. This machine can effectively take 96% of the toxins out of the body in 90 minutes. And I've got involved in it from the point of view of raising the funds to invest in it, but it's potentially, it's a life-changing machine, but it's also potentially going to change the medical industry, certainly in the US and globally. It's a US application, but it will go global eventually.
Chris Browne, you have amazing energy. You have fantastic focus whenever you get involved in a project and a huge work ethic. But not only that, all I'm hearing is you have a huge heart and you're really invested in things that make a difference. And thank you for adding so much value. And thank you for coming on today and sharing your thoughts and insights with our folks at Success is Never Accidental.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Enjoyed it very much.
So many wonderful success insights from our guest today, Chris Browne. He said, whatever job we are doing, we should do it to the very best of our ability. And that's such an important message for anyone in a temporary position or an agency role, or even someone who is unsure whether their present position is the right one for them. Whatever we're doing, do it to the very best of our ability. And he said, as leaders, it's important that we set and uphold standards. And I told a funny story about standards was always my go-to word when my kids were growing up. And he said, when choosing staff, look for enthusiasm and energy. Look for people who have a willingness to do a really good job, and look for intelligence, an intelligence that can be applied to doing the best version of the job. And then he said, as leaders, especially as we achieve greater seniority in organizations, we have to model great leadership behavior. And that includes consistently demonstrating respect for others, being sensitive, and showing an interest in all the different roles within the organization and celebrating successes. And above all, Chris helped us to see how critical having a positive mindset is. So he said, choose to be happy and positive. Choose to be the best version of yourself. Choose to succeed. Choose to add value. And it's really an important reminder that we get to make all of those choices. So my challenge for you this week is it's time for a check-in with yourself. What is one thing in your life that's not getting the best of you at present? Is it in a relationship? Is it about a health issue? Or is it an aspect of your career? Whatever it is, I want you to commit to raise the bar and hold yourself to a higher standard. Because success is never accidental. Success is intentional.